right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and anybody else can just jump on in. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be on lesson 2 today. We're going to be going over poses and body structure and building an entire character. So when you're drawing a character, you're going to want to usually start with some construction lines to basically give your character a frame to go off of. They're not going to be an exact what you're ending with, but you're going to be able to have some good structures and figures to work off of. So if you want to learn how to do construction lines, there are basically 3 different kinds of construction lines. So the construction lines are going to help you build a character structure and frame, and they're going to help with proportions and knowing where your character is positioned. So the first kind of construction lines are going to be a skeletal construction line, which is going to be, like I showed you last week, if you were in the class last week, with the head, it's going to be the construction of where your face is going to be angled. And the skeletal construction line would be basically the same thing for the body. Going to be straight lines, circles to figure out where the joints would go. So you would do a straight line through like the arms, the legs, the torso, and anywhere that would bend would have a circle. So where the neck would go into the spine, the shoulders, elbows, wrists, the hips and knees would all have the circles. And then the second sort of construction line would be body filling. So it would be filling out where the body would be. And if you can see some of the red lines, I'm not sure how clear that would be, but it would just be basically shaping out your character from there. And that doesn't need to be super defined or anything, but it would be figuring out where the waistline is going to be or where the hips would be and where you would want your hair and your hands, and building your arms a lot thicker than just a stick figure. And then you would have your refined shape for the third construction line. So with the refined shape, you're going to do a lot more detail, like adding fingers to the hand or adding a lot more detail in how your waist is shaped or how your hair or your eyes are going to be. Instead of just where they are, you're going to do more how they're shaped exactly. And it's going to be more of your finished product. So when you're drawing, obviously there's going to be a couple different ways of doing things, but if you're going to be drawing a basic male figure, the average masculine male adult is going to be broad-shouldered and have thicker limbs and torso. As with their head, it's going to be more solid, blocky lines and create very strong shapes for very visual aesthetics. So when you're starting out with your drawing, you're going to create construction lines for the basic shape of your character and test the posture and poses of your character, figure out how you want them to look and how you want them to be shaped. Typically, leading male characters will often have broader shoulders and go with a triangular shape down to the pelvis. So the shoulders are going to be a lot wider than what the hips are going to be on the average male character. When you are thickening the skeleton into what will be the final silhouette of the character, of the character's physique, this is going to be a key part of effectively communicating the core physical attributes of your character. So you're going to add texture and shape to what the basic skeletal structure would be. And when drawing the refined lines of your character's anatomy, you want to try to use lines as effectively as possible. Too many lines, you're going to make your character look way too busy and almost unrealistic. While if you do not enough, it's going to look unfinished. Then when you move to the basic female figure, the skeletal structure of a female figure is going to usually have elegant curves and an hourglass shape as with the torso, and more dainty and softer looking limbs. Of course, this is not the average, but this is going to be the general look and shape and be the general approach for most leading ladies and a good starting point for most female figures. With the women, you're going to typically have female hips are typically wider than the males, and their shoulders are usually more narrow. So when drawing a female, you're going to usually do, you're usually going to have the shoulders and the hips roughly in line with each other. So unlike with the male figure where it slopes down like the triangle, it's going to be more hourglass and straight comparedly to each other. And don't be afraid to use curves to your advantage when you're drawing a female, because they typically are a lot more curvy. So when you're drawing the final details of the anatomy of a female body, think less is more. Too many lines and you're going to unintentionally create a more masculine definition of muscle body structure, which does come off more masculine, which for some characters can be very effective, but typically is not in the average female frame. So just keep it a little more simple for the ladies. So when you're practicing to do poses and construction lines, drawing dramatic poses and dynamic poses, you want to start out with some simpler shapes and very rough sketching. A lot more circles and roughly defining figures. I mean, you can see this one, I just kind of colored in. I didn't even really do specific lines, but it gives you a lot of structure on how to create the character based on how their body is posed at that point. So you can have strong and confident with the chin raised and strong torso and strong straight legs, or you can have very low energy and very low confidence with curved spine and dropped shoulders and elbows and a little bit lower head, drop down a lot more. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple ways how you can use and learn to start using construction lines or to build them on already existing characters. So a lot of the things I usually do is I will go grab photos of already drawn characters or even Google some characters. I usually take some of the characters that I've already drawn and I will build their construction lines to see if and how their body would be shaped. So if you wanted to redo him, can't remember his name off the top of my head now. So you would start with the circle for the head. I usually start with their head and figure out where the chin would be pointing and just kind of start figuring out where the balls and the straight lines would be positioned on the characters. Since he would have more of a drop shoulder, you would angle the shoulder joints more down and one further up. And just kind of start building out the character's shape. And since he would have a little bit more of a curve to his spine, I usually try to draw the rib cage in with this so that way you have a rough idea of where that would be. But his spine would bend back a little bit more into the hips. So that just kind of starts getting you used to how a character is going to be shaped. And we could always go off of a couple others, like Beast Boy, where he's going to be a little more, his face is going to be a little bit more straight on. But his shoulders are going to be a little more up into his head. So you're not going to necessarily see the joint where the neck would be positioned into the spine. And since his arm covers most of where the construction line would be, you're just going to focus on the front part of the hand where it would curve back and the hand would be blocking the shoulder mostly. So that's a couple of practice things with figuring out how to start using construction lines. So to show you some of the ways how effective construction lines and like thumbnail sketches are able to work. This was an old drawing that I did just for a thumbnail sketch of a finished piece that I would be finishing later. But I drew out some Avenger characters and I just kind of very roughly sketched where I would believe them to be positioned and drew out more refined sketches so that I could in turn put them onto one larger piece of paper. So I went from having a basic sketch of the characters into a more refined finished piece with them all on one spot, but I used the thumbnail to figure out where I wanted each character to be. So I could figure out where I wanted them to be placed and how best it would be to place them. All right. All right, so for the character we're going to draw today is going to be an original character that I designed, a Jedi, because I like Star Wars. So I already drew out the basic skeletal structure for the character. So this character is looking straight on. So when you do the construction lines, it's going to be a straightforward front view facial figure. And the spine is fairly straight as well. She's going to be facing very directly at you. So it's going to be like a small T from the neck to the hips and for the shoulders. And then you can put circles at the ends of each of those and in the center where the shoulders and the spine cross, and figure out where the rib cage would basically be sitting. With the arms, I tend to do my arms a little too long sometimes, but your hands are going to roughly, if you would put them down, they're going to be about halfway along the calf, or not the calf, sorry, the thigh. So when your arms go back down, they should be roughly in line with that part of your leg. Right. All right, then to begin building structure to your character, you want to begin adding a little bit of structure to the character. So you're going to thicken them out a lot. I usually start roughly with the neck, which is going to be just a little bit thinner than the jawline. And then you want to try to just kind of go around all of the construction lines that you created. With the shoulders, sometimes you can go right up against the ball socket just to figure out where it's going to be going. But a lot of times I draw them a little bit smaller. So you're going to want to leave some space between the ball socket and where you're building the character's shape. And I usually tend to do the outside of the arm first and move on to the rib cage of the character, because that's going to change where the inside of the arm would be on the character, because a lot of times the chest is going to cover the inside of the arm. So I usually, after I'm done with about the first upper half of the outside of the arm, I usually move on to the character's chest to see where the character's chest is going to go. And then, like I said, when you're doing the female character, you're going to want to try to make the hips and the shoulders usually line up. So it's going to be a line more out for the chest, then in for the waist, and then back out for the hips. Then at this point, I usually go back to the upper arm to create the inside of the arm. At this point, I usually try to figure out what clothes the character is wearing. And since this one has long sleeves, I usually would end the hand or end right before the hand and create the sleeve line. So I would just make like a straight or curved line to end off the hand or end off before the hand. And then even though this character is going to be having a skirt on, I usually do try to figure out at least roughly where the legs are going to go. So that way I know roughly how the legs are still positioned. I would just recommend not drawing those lines in too dark because you'll probably erase them. But doing that will help you figure out where the edge of the bottom of the exposed leg would be. Now, when it comes to the feet and the hands, I'm not gonna lie, they are some of the hardest parts to draw on a character because there's a lot of detail and a lot of moving shapes to it. So I'm gonna start with the easier hand. On the left side over here. So when I'm drawing hands, I gotta sharpen the pencil. All right. So when I'm drawing hands, a lot of times with like cartoon characters, you usually see cartoon characters with 3 fingers and 1 thumb because it's going to be a lot easier to draw, but I try to get the 4 fingers and thumb in there. But you're just going to round the fingers, which I don't like that, so I'm going to erase it. And feel free to erase anything, try it again, keep going till you feel like you've got it right, or at least somewhat close. So when you're building the hand, what I usually do is I usually start with either the thumb or the pinky. And when you're working with the pinky, because the other fingers are going to be so close, you're going to start just kind of almost like an M, where you would make another line off of the top of the line. So you're not going to go in and draw every single finger. You're going to allude to it after so long because her hand's going to be open. And the second hand will be a little bit harder because she's got it closed. Then when you get to the thumb on this hand, you're going to end the finger line a little bit further down because the thumb's going to be a little further down. Just kind of end it off there. So it's going to be a lot shorter than the rest of the hand. So with the second hand, the one with the lightsaber, I'm just going to make a little tube where the lightsaber would be. So where the circle that you created for the hand would be, just kind of start putting, I would say, little circles for where the fingers would be. For the thumb, it's going to be going a little more straight out, almost like this. So I oftentimes, when drawing hands, will look at my own hand because you'll be able to see how things are being held in your hand or how a hand is supposed to be looking when it's being drawn. So she would be holding it where the thumb would be pointed out in the, like this, where lightsaber would be going out. So the fingers would be over the edge of the thumb. So the thumb would be going out. And then I start just making almost like little circles or little bubbles to kind of create that hand. And because I put the edge of the sleeve a little bit too far back, you can always adjust that and put it where you need to. I put it right up against where the hand would be, so it looks like the hand's coming directly out of the sleeve. And then I just do a straight line out to create the rest of that saber. Right, and then to make the sleeve look like your hand would be in it, your sleeve would be very circular, and it's going to be bigger than what the character's figure and frame is going to be. So you want to make that just slightly bigger than where your character's body would be. And the end of the sleeve will end in a lower circle because you'd have to get it through. And with clothing, I personally wasn't the best at clothing up until a couple years ago. I had to practice at it quite a bit because clothing has a lot of folds to it. And when you're doing folds in clothing, especially with sleeves, all of the clothes are going to be going down for the most part. So you're going to angle all of your folds downwards, either up in or down. So I usually would, at this point, just kind of put a couple lines kind of going in towards the frame of the figure. And when you do that, you want to bulk out the sleeve a little bit further to make it almost look like it's circular around where you created those lines. And you don't have to do too many of those because it's, like I said before, if you do too many lines, it's going to start looking a little too messy. So don't need to overdo it. And at this point, you could erase the lines for the shoulder and where the construction lines of the arm would be. So you can kind of see the whole shape of the arm. And then you're going to go over and do basically the same thing with the other arm. There's usually going to be a lot of folds in the sleeve where it comes to where your elbow is and underneath of the arm as well, by the armpit. There's going to be a lot more folds usually in those areas. At this point, I usually do erase most of the construction lines that I would have for the skeletal construction lines because they're not as necessary once you have the basic figure sketched out. But if you want to leave them in a little bit longer, that's up to you. Kind of depends on how you feel most comfortable when you're drawing. I usually do away with them at this point. The ones that I at least am done with. So at this point, I'm going to go down to adding in the skirt that's going to hide most of the legs. So you're going to figure out where the hip would be on the character. And you're going to do either a straight line across or slightly curved line, or you can do it a lot more slanted and have it further down on one side than the other. But where you would have the line for your character already there, the edge of the hip, you're going to go out from that just a little bit, not too much. And just kind of follow the leg down. And usually at the end of the skirt, you would have a little bit more room at the bottom. And I usually round out the edge of the bottom of the skirt. And because it goes from the above the knee on one side of the leg to below it, you're going to go up to about mid thigh on the opposite leg. And then just add a little bit more room on the other side of it for the skirt on the other leg. And then you can go in and erase that part of the leg that's going to be hidden by the skirt. And with this part, you're going to do a lot more lines in from where the hips would be, because they're going to go in towards the center of both the legs. And going down. Right. Then with creating the neckline, you can either do a V-neck or a slow curve around the edge of the neck. And just make sure it's out a little bit further than where the neck would actually stop. And then on this character, I have some belts, fairly thick belts around the waist that go just above where you would place the skirt. And then for creating the face, you're going to go back to basically the same construction portions that I would have taught you last week. And this character has a lot of hair more down towards the face. So most of the head is gonna probably end up going away. And I usually, when I'm doing hair, I just kind of make a lot of triangles or some jagged lines, kind of random, sporadic. You don't really have to be too specific with the hair. And if you do something you don't like, you can always go back and erase it. And I'm going to add a hood, which is going to be bigger than the head. Right. And then for the boots, with the shoes, I always have to try to practice a lot. And it made me feel really good. I was watching another artist online and who are professional and have done it for years. And all four of them said that they wish that they were better at shoes. So even if you're professional, there's always going to be something you're going to be a little bit not as good at, and always something that you're going to work at a little bit more than others. But usually with shoes, especially boots, I try to add a lot of detail to the shoes, usually a lot of straps. And like this one, I put metal toes on the end. And where your foot would be, you're going to add a little bit of room for what the bottom of the shoe would be, so the sole of the shoe. And just start following it back up the leg. And then on this one, I have straps on the back of it. I don't know, just kind of play around with it, see what you think looks good. And I use a lot of visual references because a lot of people tell you not to unless it's right off of real life. But I feel like having drawings that other people have done, you can see how things have been made, and you can get more of a feel of how that's supposed to look drawn rather than just in real life. I do use a lot of real life references, but I tend to also go for a lot of like specific cartoon styled characters or already pre-drawn characters, because it shows you how things will look based on how somebody does it in pencil or in marker or whatever it is you're working with. Because not every artist is gonna think I want to draw a giraffe and then just go sit down and draw a giraffe. They're gonna probably look at a giraffe to see how it's shaped. And then usually when you're doing shoes, since you have two of the same shoes, you are going to want to look back between both of them to make sure that the details you're putting in each shoe at least match up fairly close to how it would be if it's like this one where her foot's turned one direction but not turned the other direction. So you just kind of try to see if they at least make sense, that they would look like a matching set of shoes. I made her shoe a little too wide, so I'm going to erase some of it. And then this part here is going to be a little bit of the back of the skirt because you'd be able to see a little bit of the bottom of it from behind her. Then to add the cloak, cloaks are going to be a lot more difficult because there's going to be a lot of lines. But usually what I do is I would shape out roughly where I want to put the edge of the cape. And then I'm going to make a little bit of a triangle outwards and kind of curve it back to where you've started the triangle or the cape at, or wherever it is you want to have it start going back into itself. So that's going to be what would curve around. And with the back of it, because it's going to match the curve on the other side. So wherever the corners of the triangles that you made, I would start putting a reversed curve across the back. So it would be like a moon shape that direction between the corners of the cape. So it would flow to the back of the cape. And with the inside of the cape, if you're going to color it, it's going to not matter as much, but since this is not colored, it's going to be just a couple of lines downwards, or you can even do them towards where the curve of the cape would be. And I usually do a couple coming up from where the bottom of the cape meets. So it kind of looks like it's flowing a little bit. And then with the other side of the cape, just do a couple of lines to make it look like it's flowing a little bit. And usually it would bend towards the edge of the corner of the cape at the end. I think I also have like a sash around the character for the top. And so at this point, I'd start again erasing the lines that I no longer need. So like the shoulders that are now covered by the hair. And I accidentally erased a few things when I did the face, so I'm just going to put those back in. I'm going to just add a couple of lines in the hair to make it look like it's flowing down. All right, so at this point, the character is basically finished. So if there's any questions you have about it, go ahead and hop on and ask anything that you'd like to. I'll definitely give you some time to keep drawing what you like. What I normally do when I'm pretty happy with how everything's turned out at this point, I'll usually go over again with a little bit more pressure and some thicker lines so that they're not so feathered, I guess, just to make it a little bit more refined than just feathery light lines. Or I'll even go over this portion with a gel pen so that you can go over it with the pen and then erase the pencil lines from the piece. All right. Was there any final questions before we get off of here today?
Doesn't sound like anybody has any questions.
All right.
All right. And next week we have what? Let's see. Color palettes, shading, lighting, and texture all in one class.
Yes. So
Right.
for next week, everybody's going to want to bring colored pencils or even markers, whatever you prefer to color with. Even if you want to bring crayons, just bring something that you can color with. And if you want to bring this sketch from today, we can recolor this one or have something already kind of pre-prepared to color so that we don't have to bother drawing something next week. We can just focus more on how to color it.
Okay. And just to let everybody know, the videos are getting posted on the Massillon Public Library's YouTube page. So if you want to rewatch this video or, follow along with it again, you can do that. The last week's video is already on the page. This one should be up in a couple of days when our fabulous IT guys get to get it uploaded on there. Okay. And I will get the video or the link for next week sent out Thursday or Friday next week. Okay.
All right. Thank you all for joining. Have a nice day, and we'll see you next week.
Have a good week, everybody.